Thank you for your questions. They've been ranked in the usual way, so I shall try and answer them. Question 1, would you close Menwith Hill listening base? This is a US base. I think Britain benefits from the relationship with the US, which is a two-way relationship, but the short answer is no, we don't have any plans to do that. Britain and America have shared intelligence, have worked together, whether we were facing the threat from Soviet communism or today facing the threat from extremist terrorism. We work together, and that's important that we do. So that would be that one. Question 2, which is a complicated question about alleged MI5, MI6 involvement in terrorism in Northern Ireland, and then also making a number of points about Kosovo and Abu Hamza and the Afghan war. And it asks, what is your knowledge and opinion of these events? Look, on the question of Ireland, I obviously can't comment on a report that hasn't yet been published, and a report will be published, and that'll be the right time to say something about that. On the issue of Abu Hamza and Kosovo, a very complex series of points being put here. I just make a simple point, which is that the security services are there under the direction of ministers and now scrutinised by Parliament to help protect the security and the national interest of our country. And I think it's vitally important that they are there. Britain does face a threat from terrorism, particularly extremist terrorism from very extreme Islamic groups, and MI5 and MI6 have a lot of work to do in terms of combating those groups, and that is as it should be. We have to deal with the problem, we have to confront and defeat it, and I think some of the points that have been put are a little bit on the conspiracy theory wing of things. Question 3, Islamic extremism and the future of multiculturalism in Britain. The question is, I have one difficult but clear question to ask you. What is your stance as Tory leader, and what would you do as Prime Minister on the growing Islamic extremist tendencies in modern Britain? And I think the first thing we have to say here is very important to say to all British Muslims that the vast, overwhelming majority of British Muslims want to be part of a successful and strong Britain, and that cannot be said too many times. Yes, we have to deal with the very small minority of extremists, but we shouldn't, in the process, point the finger at the whole community of British Muslims. That wouldn't be right. What do we do to deal with the extremists in our midst? I think we have to be very tough at policing the law properly against incitement to violence and incitement to racial hatred, and make sure that the police feel empowered to do that. I also think that there are a number of things we could do to tighten the law and to make it more effective. For instance, we've talked about having a border police so that we secure our borders more effectively. We've talked about making intercept evidence available in court so that people can actually be tried and prosecuted and imprisoned rather than just have suspicions against them. I think those two steps would make a real difference. But above all, what I think we need is a greater sense of national cohesion and a greater sense of integration. And what I said in a speech in Birmingham recently is, of course, you can't bully people into feeling British, but I hope what you can do is inspire people into feeling British and wanting to integrate into part of a successful multiracial country. And I think what that means is getting rid of the barriers that stop that from happening. And those barriers include entrenched poverty, poor education, often in city areas where people in the ethnic minorities haven't had the educational opportunities that they ought to have. I think the approach of multiculturalism we've had in the last 20 years has been a bit of a barrier, because we've actually put different groups in different silos and treated them as separate. And I think that uncontrolled immigration has also created a barrier, because there is if you have too much immigration, it becomes more difficult to integrate people successfully into a prosperous, cohesive and contented country. So those are the barriers that we need to take down, but as the question suggests, the barrier of extremism is perhaps the most pressing today, and I've set out how we should deal with that. Question 4, the European Union. David, what future changes would you like to see in terms of Britain's membership of the European Union? Well, I think we should stay in the European Union, but I think we should fight for change in the European Union. The first and perhaps most straightforward things, I oppose the European Constitution. I think it's about passing powers from member states to Brussels. I think that's a bad idea, and that's why we always oppose the Constitution. We call for a referendum on the Constitution, and if the government try to bring it back in any way, we will call for that referendum again. I also think we should keep the pound as our currency. I think joining the euro would not be right for Britain. I think it's very important to understand that if you have a single currency across Europe, you have to have a single interest rate across Europe. And there may well be times when different countries need different interest rates. So I think it's in our economic interest to keep the pound as our currency, and that will always be my approach. In terms of the future, I do have a positive vision for what I think the European Union ought to be doing. Instead of looking inwards on itself and trying to design another power-grabbing constitution, I think it should be looking outwards at the rest of the world. It should be widening itself still further, drawing in other countries into the European Union. I think that it should be fighting for free trade around the world and pushing for a restart of the world trade talks. I think it should be doing more on the shared problems we have, like pollution and climate change, and I'd like to see the emissions trading system updated and improved. And very, very important, when the unemployed are one of the largest nations in Europe, we should be fighting throughout Europe for deregulation, for open markets, for free trade, so that we can reduce the dole queues and make sure that people in Europe have access to jobs and to prosperity. So a forward-looking vision, one that is about a more flexible, outward-looking Europe, a more market-based Europe, a Europe that has a strong relationship with America and the Atlantic relationship being strong, rather than one which is, perhaps what I would say is more of the sort of Cold War creation of an inward-looking, more integrated political Europe. That's what I believe we should fight for. Sorry for the long answer, but it's a very important question. Question 5, Webcameron rejects. On Webcameron, there's not a massive amount of scope for socialisation or for discussing topics with somewhat less gravity or being completely frivolous. Also, some things get a little heated on this site. I've created a forum to fill this void. It's called Webcameron Rejects. Doesn't seem to be a question. Oh, you created a forum. Oh, I see. Well, I must go and have a look at it and see what I think about it. When I have, I'll come back and tell you what I think.